On April 2024, a senior judicial magistrate court in Bangladesh permanently dismissed the kidnapping case of an Indigenous activist named Kalpana Chakma. She had been missing for 28 years. The court accepted a final police report that effectively ended the search. The lead investigator provided a specific justification for the closure. The investigation could not advance because the victim herself had not returned to testify about her own abduction. This conclusion was the result of nearly 3 decades of work by 39 different investigating police officers. None of them had moved the case toward a trial. The most striking aspect of the dismissal is that the police were never looking for a mystery suspect. The primary perpetrators were identified by eyewitnesses on the very first day. The crime took place here, in the Chittagong Hill Tracts of southeastern Bangladesh. In 1996, this region was a heavily militarized conflict zone, defined by a long-standing struggle for autonomy. For years, the indigenous Juma people faced a campaign of land grabbing and displacement. The military maintained a constant presence in the hills, enforcing state control through a network of camps and checkpoints. Indigenous women were primary targets in this conflict. Violence was frequently used to intimidate the population and suppress the movement for indigenous rights. The state's refusal to prosecute the kidnapping served as a strategic shield for the local military command. In a territory governed by force, maintaining absolute military impunity was a functional necessity. Kalpana Chakma was 23 years old and the organizing secretary of the Hill Women's Federation. She spent her time documenting rapes and military abuses, ensuring that the suffering of indigenous people was not omitted from the public record. In June 1996, the stakes were high. A parliamentary election was approaching, and Kalpana was aggressively mobilizing the indigenous vote, campaigning for a candidate who represented the interests of the Hill tribes. 2 weeks before the election, 7 houses and a Buddhist temple were burned to the ground. Kalpana did not hesitate to publicly blame the local army commander. She stood in front of witnesses and confronted Lieutenant Firdaus by name. She demanded an inquiry and refused to be intimidated by his position. At 1:30 a.m. on the morning of the election, armed men arrived at her family home in the rural village of New Laliagona. The men were in plain clothes. They broke down the door, bound Kalpana and her 2 brothers, and forced them out into the darkness of the hills. The captors marched the siblings away from the house toward a nearby wetland. When Kalindi heard an order to shoot, he and his brother threw themselves into the water. They swam into the darkness, reaching safety. Kalpana did not reach the water. From somewhere in the dark, Kalindi heard his sister call out his name one last time. Kalindi survived and went directly to the police. He filed a report naming the 3 men he had recognized in the dark, including Lieutenant Firdaus. Almost immediately, the military began introducing counter-narratives to muddy the eyewitness account. They circulated a rumor that Kalpana had not been abducted, but had instead eloped with Lieutenant Firdaus. This lie was designed to transform a violent political crime into a matter of private desire. It attempted to reduce a dedicated activist to a character in a romantic drama. Secondary rumors suggested she had fled into voluntary exile or staged the abduction herself. These stories were designed to lodge doubt in the public mind and protect the reputation of the security forces. The legal failure was absolute. Across 3 decades, not one of the 39 investigating officers ever formally interrogated the prime suspect, Lieutenant Firdaus. Instead of facing an inquiry, Firdaus was promoted to major and allowed to retire with his military benefits fully intact. The military further insulated those involved by deploying them to international peacekeeping missions. This provided a layer of global prestige to a force that was actively avoiding accountability at home. This created a bureaucracy of impunity. The legal system itself became the mechanism for ensuring that those who carried out the abduction remained beyond the reach of the law. For 30 years, Kalindi Kumar Chakma has carried the same testimony through courts and press conferences. He refuses to let the official record stand unchallenged while he is still alive to contest it. The state managed to hide her body, but they failed to produce silence. 30 years later, Kalpana Chakma remains the primary face of indigenous resistance in Bangladesh.